demanding to know why he had stayed away for so long. In the fall of 2008, the town of Havenwood, nestled in the rolling hills of New Hampshire, was painted in hues of amber and gold. Life moved slowly here, where the old clock tower marked time for a community of close-knit neighbors. Among them was Claire Bennett, a striking woman with chestnut hair that framed her delicate face. Her deep green eyes carried a quiet sadness, a reflection of years spent balancing heartache with fierce determination. Claire was a single mother to Josie, an overactive 11-year-old with a voice that could silence even the most boisterous crowd. Josie had inherited her mother's hair, but her hazel eyes sparkled with a brightness all her own. She was precocious, bursting with energy, and always humming a tune. Life hadn't turned out the way Claire had envisioned. When she was 4 months pregnant, her husband, Nate, left for a job in Boston, with promises of finding a new home for their family. Months later, Claire gave birth to Josie alone. Nate visited once, just long enough to hold his daughter in the hospital, and then disappeared. Claire filed for divorce and, with the support of Nate's parents and her own, built a life for Josie in Havenwood. The Bennett household was small but warm, tucked on a quiet street where the maples stretched their fiery red branches over sidewalks. Claire worked tirelessly at the local diner, pouring coffee and sharing kind smiles with customers who knew her by name. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and let her be home in the evenings with Josie. Their nights were spent reading stories, working on school projects, or simply listening to Josie sing while Claire cleaned up after dinner. Josie's voice, pure and melodic, was a constant reminder to Claire that while life hadn't been perfect, it was still beautiful. Every so often, Nate's absence loomed like a shadow over their lives. It was in the way Josie hesitated when filling out forms at school that asked for her father's name, or when she watched other kids with their dads at the park. Claire saw it in the questions Josie didn't dare ask, questions about why Nate left or what he was doing now. Claire did her best to fill the gaps with stories of love, hope, and resilience, but some voids couldn't be filled. Havenwood itself seemed untouched by time. The general store sold penny candy in jars, the local paper was still delivered to porches, and everyone knew everyone else's business. Claire found solace in this familiarity, in knowing she wasn't alone in her struggles. Nate's parents, George and Evelyn, were particularly supportive. They adored Josie, often taking her for ice cream or to the library to give Claire a break. Evelyn, a sharp-eyed woman with a soft heart, was fiercely protective of Claire and often muttered about Nate's selfishness. "He doesn't deserve the both of you," she'd say, shaking her head while helping Claire fold laundry. "But he'll regret it one day. Mark my words." Despite the undercurrent of pain, Claire was determined to make life as normal as possible for Josie. Saturdays were their special days. They'd bake cookies, watch movies, or visit the small farmers market on Main Street. Josie, ever the performer, would sometimes break into song in the middle of the market, her voice drawing smiles and applause from the vendors and shoppers. Claire would laugh, a sound that had grown rare since Nate's departure, and feel a flicker of pride. Still, there were nights when Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd ever be enough for Josie. She knew she was doing her best, but the weight of being both mother and father sometimes felt unbearable. What if Josie resented her one day for not giving her more? What if she sought answers Claire couldn't provide? One particularly crisp autumn morning, as the leaves skittered across the pavement like whispers of change, Josie came bounding into the kitchen, her eyes alight with excitement. "Mom, Mr. Wright's putting on a musical at the theater, and I have to audition. Can I? Please?" Joel Wright was Havenwood High's beloved history teacher and part-time theater director. Known for his booming laugh and endless patience, he was something of a local celebrity. His annual productions at the community theater were a town tradition, often involving students and adults alike. Claire hesitated, the practical side of her worrying about the time commitment, but she couldn't ignore the way Josie's face lit up. Singing was her daughter's passion, and Claire had always promised herself she'd support Josie's dreams. "All right," Claire said with a small smile. "You can audition, but you'll have to keep up with your schoolwork and no skipping chores." Josie squealed with delight, wrapping her arms around her mother in a fierce hug. "You're the best, Mom. I'll be the star of the show, just wait and see." Claire laughed, ruffling Josie's hair. "I don't doubt it for a second." As Josie darted off to practice her audition piece, Claire stood by the sink, watching her daughter through the window as she twirled in the yard, singing to an audience of trees. For the first time in a long while, Claire felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was a new beginning. Not just for Josie, but for both of them. Life in Havenwood wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And in the small moments of joy and song, Claire realized it might just be enough. Josie's passion for singing was undeniable. She sang in the shower, during chores, and even while walking to school. When she heard about the upcoming musical at the community theater, directed by the local high school teacher, Joel Wright, Josie begged Claire to let her audition. Joel was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a warm, inviting smile that softened the sharpness of his features. His brown hair was streaked with silver, and his deep voice commanded attention, whether he was teaching history or directing the annual musical. Joel had his own scars. His wife had left him years ago, running off with his best friend, leaving him to rebuild his life alone. Josie earned a lead role in the musical, and her rehearsals consumed her evenings. During this time, Claire and Joel grew close. Their shared experiences of abandonment and single parenthood created a bond that blossomed into friendship. On opening night, Josie dazzled the crowd. Her voice filled the theater, earning her a standing ovation. Joel, watching from the wings, couldn't help but marvel at the talent he had helped nurture. It was Josie who first suggested that Joel and Claire go on a date, a suggestion both adults initially laughed off but secretly considered. As the weeks went by, the theater became a second home for Josie. She thrived under Joel's direction, soaking in his guidance and pushing herself to hit every note perfectly. The other cast members, a mix of teenagers and a few adults from Havenwood, quickly warmed to Josie's infectious enthusiasm and undeniable talent. Even those who initially doubted her ability were silenced by the raw emotion in her voice during rehearsals. For Claire, evenings at the theater were a mixture of pride and unease. She often sat in the back row, watching Josie pour her heart into her performance while stealing glances at Joel. He was always so patient with the cast, his voice calm but firm as he offered constructive feedback. When he laughed, it filled the space, and Claire couldn't help but notice the warmth he radiated. She told herself that any attraction she felt was foolish. After all, their connection was built on shared hardship, not romance. One chilly evening after a particularly long rehearsal, Joel approached Claire as the cast dispersed for the night. "Claire," he began, his deep voice tentative, "I just wanted to say how incredible Josie's been. She's a natural. You must be so proud." Claire smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I am. But I think she has you to thank for that. You've been such a positive influence on her." Joel shrugged modestly. "She's the one with the talent. I just give her a nudge here and there." He paused, his gaze lingering. "You know, you're pretty incredible yourself. Raising a daughter like Josie can't be easy." Claire felt a warmth creep into her cheeks. "It has its moments," she admitted, "but she makes it worth it." Joel nodded, his expression softening. "If you ever need a break, maybe we could grab a coffee sometime." "Just as friends," he added quickly, though his eyes held something more. Claire hesitated, her heart fluttering at the suggestion. "I'd like that," she said finally, her voice quiet but certain. As opening night approached, the theater buzzed with anticipation. Posters adorned storefront windows, and tickets sold out faster than anyone expected. The entire town seemed eager to see what Joel and his cast had put together. When the big night arrived, Josie was a bundle of nerves. Claire found her backstage, pacing in her costume. "Mom," Josie whispered, her voice shaky, "what if I mess up?" Claire knelt down, taking Josie's hands in her own. "Listen to me, sweetheart. You've worked so hard for this. Everyone out there believes in you, and no matter what happens, I'm already so proud of you." Josie's hazel eyes filled with determination as she nodded. "Okay," she said, drawing in a deep breath. "I can do this." And she did. From the moment Josie stepped onto the stage, she captivated the audience. Her voice soared, filling the theater with an emotion that left more than a few eyes glistening. When the final curtain fell, the applause was deafening. People rose to their feet, cheering as Josie and her castmates took their bows. Backstage, Joel clapped Josie on the shoulder. "You were extraordinary," he said, his voice filled with pride. Josie beamed. "Thanks, Mr. Wright. You're the best director ever." Joel chuckled, glancing at Claire, who stood nearby with tears in her eyes. "Well, I had a lot of help." After the show, the cast and crew gathered for a small celebration at the theater. Joel found Claire standing by the refreshments table, watching Josie bask in the attention of her friends and well-wishers. "She's a star," Joel said, handing Claire a glass of sparkling cider. Claire smiled, her eyes following Josie. "She's always been a star. It just took the right stage for everyone else to see it." Joel raised his glass in a mock toast. "To Josie, and to you, for raising such an incredible kid." They clinked glasses, and for a moment, everything else fell away. The hum of conversations around them faded, and Claire found herself caught in Joel's steady gaze. "You know," Joel said after a beat, "Josie told me something funny during rehearsal last week." "Oh?" Claire asked, tilting her head. "She said I should take you out on a date." Joel's smile was both amused and hopeful. "What do you think? Should I take her advice?" Claire laughed, her cheeks warming. "She's a smart girl," she said, taking a sip of her cider. "Maybe you should." Joel grinned, his eyes twinkling with a boyish charm Claire hadn't seen before. "Well then, Claire Bennett, consider this my official request for a date." "I think I'd like that," Claire replied softly, feeling a flicker of excitement she hadn't felt in years. As the celebration continued, Josie caught sight of them talking and shot Claire a knowing grin. Claire rolled her eyes playfully, but couldn't help smiling. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel so uncertain. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful. Over the next year, Claire and Joel's relationship deepened. Joel became a father figure to Josie, attending her performances and supporting her dreams. On their one-year anniversary, Joel proposed to Claire under a canopy of stars, and she said yes. They decided to wait until after Josie graduated from high school to get married. By the time Josie turned 16, she was a local star. Her performances at the community theater drew crowds from neighboring towns. It was during her high school graduation party that a figure from the past re-emerged. Nate, now graying but still handsome, appeared at the party unannounced. Josie, who had no memory of him, was confused by his presence. Claire and Nate's parents were furious. Nate's sudden reappearance at Josie's graduation party was like a storm cloud rolling into an otherwise perfect day. He arrived uninvited, his tailored suit and carefully styled appearance a stark contrast to the casual warmth of the celebration. Claire froze when she saw him, the color draining from her face. George and Evelyn, Nate's parents, stiffened visibly, their expressions shifting from shock to simmering anger. Josie noticed the tension but didn't understand its source. She watched as Nate approached her, a hesitant smile on his face. "Josie," he said, his voice smooth but unfamiliar. "You look just like your mother." Josie furrowed her brow. "Do I know you?" "I'm your father," Nate replied, his tone almost casual, as though the revelation was as simple as stating the weather. The words hung in the air, heavy and disorienting. Claire stepped forward, her voice tight with controlled fury. "You have no right to call yourself that." George, his voice trembling with restrained anger, chimed in. "You haven't been a father for 16 years, Nate. What are you even doing here?" Nate's smile faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. "I just wanted to see my daughter. I thought it was time." "Time?" Evelyn snapped, her voice sharp. "Time for what? To waltz back in like nothing happened?" Josie, caught in the crossfire of emotions, looked at Claire. "Mom? Is this really him?" Claire's heart broke at the confusion and hurt in her daughter's eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, this is Nate, but he's not your father, not in the ways that matter." Over the next few weeks, Nate began reaching out to Josie, sending her texts and even showing up unannounced after rehearsals. At first, Josie tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, her curiosity about him warring with her loyalty to Claire and Joel. But it didn't take long for Nate's true motives to surface. He began pushing her to consider a performance arts school in Boston, claiming it was the best place for her to grow as an artist. He painted pictures of an exciting future, conveniently glossing over the years he had been absent. "I know people in the industry," he'd say. his charm as polished as his tailored suits. I could help you get ahead. Claire, watching from the sidelines, grew increasingly uneasy. Nate's sudden interest felt too calculated, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was after something more than a relationship with Josie. Joel, however, refused to stay on the sidelines. One evening, as Nate showed up unannounced outside the community theater, Joel intercepted him. The two men stood face to face, their tension palpable. "You need to back off," Joel said, his voice low but firm. "Josie doesn't need you swooping in now, trying to play hero. And who are you to say that?" Nate shot back, his tone dripping with disdain. "You're not her father." Joel's jaw tightened. "Maybe not by blood, but I've been there for her. Every rehearsal, every performance, every hard moment in her life, I've been the one she counted on. Not you." Nate smirked, his confidence unshaken. "She deserves more than this small-town life. Boston can give her opportunities you can't even imagine." Joel took a step closer, his eyes blazing with protectiveness. "Josie's future isn't your decision, it's hers, and hers alone. And if you think you can manipulate her, you're dead wrong." The confrontation came to a head at home later that week. Nate, undeterred, tried to corner Josie after dinner, pitching the idea of Boston again. Claire, tired of his games, stepped in, her voice steady but laced with anger. "Nate, that's enough," she said. "You don't get to come in here and disrupt her life, not after all this time." Nate ignored her, turning to Josie. "Don't you want more, Josie? Don't you want to be great?" Josie's eyes filled with tears. "I am great," she said, her voice trembling. "And it's because of my mom and Joel, not you." The words cut through the room like a knife. Nate opened his mouth to speak, but Josie wasn't finished. "You left. You didn't care about me then, and you don't care about me now. You just want something from me. Well, I don't need you. I never did." Claire stepped beside her daughter, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "You heard her, Nate. Leave." Nate hesitated, his charm slipping as the weight of rejection settled in. Finally, he turned and left, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed in the quiet house. In the days that followed, Nate continued to send messages, but Josie didn't respond. Joel, determined to understand Nate's sudden interest, hired a private investigator. The truth was even more sinister than they had imagined. Josie was set to inherit a sizable trust from her great-grandmother's estate when she turned 19. The money, originally intended for Nate, had been rerouted to Josie after he abandoned his family. Nate's sudden interest was less about fatherly love and more about financial desperation. When Josie learned the truth, she was heartbroken. "He doesn't love me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He never did." Joel pulled her into a hug, his voice gentle but firm. "You are loved, Josie. By your mom, by me, and by everyone who's been here for you. That's what matters." Nate dismissed their anger, acting as though he had a right to be there. Over the following weeks, Nate tried to rebuild a relationship with Josie, but his motives were far from pure. He began pressuring her to attend a performance arts school in Boston, claiming it was the best path for her career. Joel, seeing through Nate's intentions, intervened. In a heated confrontation, Joel declared himself Josie's father in all but blood and told Nate he had no say in her future. Josie, with tears streaming down her face, asked Nate to leave. "You're not my father," she said, her voice trembling. "You never were." Nate's persistence didn't end there. He began contacting Josie repeatedly, but she refused to meet with him. Suspicious of Nate's sudden interest, Joel hired a private investigator. The truth was more insidious than they had imagined. The investigator uncovered that Josie was set to inherit a small fortune from her great-grandmother's estate upon turning 19. This money, originally intended for Nate, had been rerouted to Josie after he abandoned his family. Nate, now struggling to maintain the lavish lifestyle he had built in Boston, was desperate for the inheritance. When Josie learned the truth, her heartbreak was profound. "He doesn't love me," she told Claire one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. "He just wants my money." Claire sat beside Josie on the edge of her bed, her heart aching for her daughter. Josie stared down at her hands, which were tightly clasped in her lap, her knuckles white. Claire gently reached over, placing a hand over Josie's. "You are so much more than his motives, Josie," Claire said softly, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. His choices don't define who you are, and his love, or lack of it, doesn't take away from the love you have from the people who matter. Josie looked up, her hazel eyes swimming with tears. I thought maybe he wanted to know me. That maybe he regretted leaving. But he didn't even try to know me, Mom. He just saw me as a way out. Claire pulled Josie into her arms, stroking her hair as the tears came. You're right, he doesn't deserve to know you, Josie. But you have Joel. You have your grandparents. And you have me. That's a family, a real family. Don't let him take any more from you than he already has. Over the next few days, Josie wrestled with her emotions. Part of her wanted to confront Nate, to demand answers. But another part of her knew that no explanation would change what he had done. It wasn't long before Nate attempted to push again, sending a long email laced with manipulative tones. I've made mistakes, the email read. But I'm still your father, and I want to be a part of your life. Don't let your mother and Joel poison you against me. You deserve to know the truth about who you are. Josie read the email once, then deleted it. It wasn't the truth he wanted to share, only another version of the lies he had been spinning his entire life. Joel, watching Josie grow more resolute, felt a deep sense of pride. He had spent years building a bond with her, and it was moments like this, seeing her strength, her ability to recognize and reject manipulation, that solidified his belief in her resilience. Still, Joel wasn't content to leave things as they were. He sat Josie down one evening in the living room, where Claire had joined them, after closing the diner early. Josie, Joel began, leaning forward. I know this has been a lot to process, and I don't want you to feel like you're facing it alone, but you need to know something. Who you let into your life is entirely your choice. Nate doesn't have any power over you unless you give it to him. Josie nodded, her expression thoughtful. I've been thinking about that, and I've decided he doesn't belong in my life. He made his choice a long time ago. Claire reached over, brushing a tear from Josie's cheek. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. As the months passed, the distance between Josie and Nate grew insurmountable. Nate's attempts to connect dwindled, especially after Josie formally blocked him from contacting her. Joel's investigator kept a quiet watch, ensuring Nate wouldn't resort to legal loopholes to stake a claim on Josie's inheritance. When Josie's 19th birthday arrived, she received the funds from her great-grandmother's estate. By then, she had plans for it, tuition for a prestigious college and a nest egg she intended to save for her dreams of making it on Broadway. Nate, despite his attempts to resurface, became nothing more than a distant memory, a cautionary tale Josie rarely dwelled on. She understood now that family wasn't defined by blood, but by love, loyalty, and the people who stayed when it mattered most. On a crisp spring morning, with Josie preparing to move to New York City for her first semester at college, Claire and Joel decided to mark the next chapter of their lives. They exchanged vows in a small lakeside ceremony, surrounded by family and close friends. Josie sang at the wedding, her voice carrying through the warm breeze, as she dedicated the performance to the people who had given her a real home. As Joel and Claire danced under the stars, Josie sat with her grandparents, laughing and telling stories. The pain Nate had caused was still a part of her, but it no longer defined her. Instead, it had become the foundation of her strength, a reminder of the love she had chosen to embrace and the person she had chosen to become. Havenwood, nestled in its timeless charm, remained the bedrock of Claire, Joel, and Josie's lives, even as their worlds expanded. Josie's departure to college had been bittersweet, marked by tearful goodbyes and promises of frequent visits. The small town felt quieter without her boundless energy, her songs echoing through the house. But Claire and Joel found solace in each other, their newlywed life filled with the warmth of companionship and shared dreams. Every few months, Josie returned home, her arms full of stories from the bustling streets of New York City. She'd talk about grueling auditions, late-night rehearsals, and the eclectic mix of people she met. Joel would listen intently, his pride in her evident in his steady smile, while Claire would quietly beam, marveling at the young woman Josie had become. Josie's rise on Broadway wasn't meteoric. It was earned through relentless hard work and unwavering determination. Her first big break came during an audition for a revival of an iconic musical. She was up against seasoned performers, and the odds seemed stacked against her. But when Josie opened her mouth to sing, the room fell silent. Her voice carried not just technical perfection, but an emotional depth that stunned the casting directors. She got the part. Opening night was a whirlwind of nerves and exhilaration. Claire and Joel were there, sitting in the front row, their hands clasped tightly as the lights dimmed. When Josie took the stage, her presence was magnetic, her voice filling the theater with an undeniable magic. The audience erupted in applause, and as she took her bows, Josie's eyes sought out her parents. Seeing their proud, tearful faces anchored her in the surreal moment. Afterward, backstage was chaos. Flowers, reporters, and congratulations from industry legends. But Josie made her way to Claire and Joel first. She hugged them tightly, whispering, "I couldn't have done this without you." Joel chuckled, wiping his eyes. "We just gave you the stage. You did the rest." Claire added, "You've always had the light, sweetheart. You just needed the right place to shine." Back in Havenwood, Claire and Joel's life remained simple but deeply fulfilling. Joel continued his work with the community theater, mentoring new generations of aspiring performers. Claire eventually left the diner and opened a small cafe by the town square, a cozy spot filled with books, live music, and framed photos of Josie's milestones. She named it Josie's Corner, a quiet homage to the girl who had brought so much meaning to her life. The cafe became a hub of activity, a place where neighbors gathered to share stories, sip coffee, and watch young local talents perform on open mic nights. Sometimes, during her visits home, Josie would surprise everyone by stepping onto the small stage and singing a song or two, her voice as captivating in the intimate setting as it was on Broadway. Nate, meanwhile, became a distant memory. Despite his initial persistence, he eventually gave up on reaching out to Josie. The truth about his motives had left an indelible mark, and Josie made it clear that she had no place for him in her life. He faded back into the anonymity he had chosen years ago, his life marked by regret and missed opportunities. For Claire and Joel, Nate was no longer a specter hanging over their happiness. He was simply part of the past, a chapter that had closed, leaving space for the family they had built together to thrive. Years later, Josie returned to Havenwood for a special occasion, the 20th anniversary of the community theater musical program that had launched her dreams. Joel, now retired from teaching but still vibrant with passion, had been invited to direct a special production featuring both seasoned actors and young talent from the town. The theater was packed that evening, the audience abuzz with excitement. Josie, now a Broadway veteran, took the stage for a surprise performance, singing a piece she had written herself, a heartfelt tribute to the place and the people who had shaped her. "This town," she said between verses, her voice thick with emotion, "gave me a home, a family, and the courage to dream. Thank you, Havenwood." As her song ended, the crowd leapt to their feet, their applause echoing through the theater. Claire, seated in the front row with Joel, dabbed at her eyes, her heart full. In the years that followed, Havenwood continued to thrive, its traditions upheld by people like Claire and Joel. Josie's star burned brightly, but she never let her success pull her too far from the people she loved. Whether it was Christmas mornings in the old Bennett house or summer evenings on the porch of Josie's Corner, she always found her way back home. For Claire and Joel, life was richer than they had ever imagined. They had weathered storms, faced heartbreak, and built something beautiful out of the pieces left behind. Together, they found joy in the everyday, in shared meals, quiet walks, and the laughter of the grandchildren Josie would one day bring into their lives. And for Josie, the girl who had once sung her heart out in a small-town theater, the future was limitless. But no matter where the road took her, she always carried Havenwood in her heart, a reminder of where she came from and the love that had lifted her there. If you enjoyed our heartwarming story, please like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.